Hey, everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. In this podcast series, I try to get to the books that have impacted the lives of people in my network, friends that I've had, new colleagues, people I've never even talked to, but have connected with through social media and LinkedIn. So I consider these great leads on books um, that are on books that have impacted their life, their work, their leadership, and really made a difference in how they operate, whether they're the writer or of the book or not. So for this particular series, I cover three categories of books: books that I haven't read that they're schooling me on, books that we've both read, and then the final category where they're the actual author of the book. So for this particular episode, I'm going to have the author of the book, and my guest will be Dr. Bridget Cooper. And a little more about Dr. Cooper. She's a cage rattler, a change strategist, a thought shifter. She's a best-selling author of 6 books on communication, conflict, change, and empowerment. And her latest, Pain Rebel, offers us a roadmap out of being buried by pain with no purpose and into empowerment and abundance. Her ambitious mission is to change the world one hopeful life at a time. Born onto the welfare system and raised by wolves, she's made her own success one broken fingernail at a time. She knows heartache and hopelessness, and she also knows the power of the mind, spirit to carry you upward. Bottom line, Dr. B sculpts the leader in all of us by making us better people first. I love that. And her
Mhm.
clients run the gamut from the Girl Scouts to Vietnam vets, from universities to jails, from insurance companies to massage therapists. Her secret mission is to bring all of these groups together someday and see what fun transpires. I love it. And um, I love that you're game for anything. I
Absolutely.
reached out to invite you onto this conversation.
Yeah,
You know some of my previous guests, and
I
even
do.
though we were connected for a few years,
Yeah.
because you see people comment on mutual connections. You're like, all right, this person has some great insights. You connect. We never really had a conversation.
No, never
It
have.
never had a conversation. This is the first time we're talking face to face, albeit virtual.
Eh,
So, Dr. B, thank you so much for joining me, taking that chance with somebody you don't even know, and
John, thank you.
having this conversation.
No, I
So,
appreciate all the work you're doing. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So, I read your bio. I love everything about it. I love the cage rattler. I love that you're game for. I can't say that enough. But why don't you tell me a little more, and the audience a little more about the work that you're doing? How would you describe the different pieces and components of what you do in your career today?
Yeah, it's interesting. Over time, my work has diversified in different ways, and the streams of income and business, and the work that needs to be done change every year. Some years it's weighted this way, some years it's weighted that way, but the composite of my business is I do a lot of work with companies and individuals within companies on helping them to work better together, work better toward their successful initiatives, figure out a goal strategy, doing a lot of strategic planning retreats. And also, I get called in to do a lot of personal and professional development workshops that run the gamut from, as it said in my bio, communication and conflict to, mental health, which is a huge issue that's been coming up the last couple of years in trying to manage the stress and fear that people have just getting up and going to work or just getting up, and helping people figure out how to modulate those behavior things, those mental struggles, to be able to work most effectively. I've done keynotes for years, although that's been kind of quiet for the last couple of years, as one can imagine. I'm an accidental author. I did not set out to become. When people talk to me about being an author, I say, oh yeah, well, I've written half a dozen books. I guess I'm an author. I don't identify that way, primarily because the way I came into it was somewhat accidental. The only book I intended to ever write, long term, was my fifth book. I mean, it took me 5 books to get to the only one that I ever intended to write. So it's been
And which one was that?
and that was Little Landslides,
Okay, okay.
because it's
So
my story. Yeah,
can you just run through the books, like the titles,
sure.
not diving into the books, but just like the
Yeah.
titles and what each is about?
Yeah. So, and I give a little, couple sentence story on each one. So the
Sure.
first one was Feed the Need. And it talks about, how we understand conflict, where it comes from, both internal, interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict, where it comes from and how to solve it. And that really emanated from saying, I've been doing more workshops, I've been doing more keynotes, and it makes sense to have a book to kind of to show what it is that my theory is, or my, some of my tidbits. Where's this wealth of knowledge that I've been giving to clients for all these years? How can I put it into one particular place and make it a package? So that's where Feed the Need came from. And then I started working on what ended up being the third book, which is called Stuck You, which is, yes, and I did mean it that way.
I like that.
But it's there's a period after the U, so it's like Stuck University, but it's a subtle period. And really, it talks about the change process, because I've been doing a lot of work with corporations and individuals on change and cultural change. And it was important for me to map out what the change process actually looks like, so that people could really follow that as a guide. But what intervened was, I was talking to a group on Feed the Need, and this young woman was in attendance, kind of supporting the event. And she said, came up to me after it and said, "Hey, you changed my life tonight." I said, "Whoa, that takes me like 3 hours. I was surprised I did that in 90 minutes." I said, "How did I do that? You're going to tell me more." And she said, "There's been a girl who's been bullying me at school, and you gave me the tools I need to go face her tomorrow." And I said, "Wow, that's powerful." And she asked, "Do you have this in teen edition?" I said, "Oh my God, you are brilliant. I never thought of that." And I don't know why I didn't think of it, John, because frankly, if I had had Feed the Need as a teen, I would have, well, I would have avoided a bad marriage and, probably 100 other, poor decisions and, hiccups in my life. And I thought, wow, this really does need to be written for teens. So I went back, and in the midst of writing Stuck You, I stopped and I edited the first Feed the Need and made it Feed the Need Teen Edition. She wrote the intro, and, she ended
That
up,
student?
yeah, that student ended up
Very
writing
cool.
the foreword. And Kate Adriani, amazing young woman, and she was a senior in high school, so she put it in with her college applications. We printed it in time for her to be able to do that, and I
How
ended up,
fancy is that for her as a college
right, a published
a
author as a
published
senior,
author?
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And and it brought tears to my eyes, because I received her intro when over the holidays, and she's dyslexic. So here's this young woman with a learning disability that she's had to overcome, with the bullying history and the trials and tribulations that so many of us have been through in our young life. And she's a published author just because she made an observation and she asked a question. That was it. That was all that took to change the trajectory of her life. And so, she ended up running a television studio at her undergrad, and a radio station. Like, she came out of her shell in ways that I don't know that, had she not taken those risks, she would have done. Right?
That's all. Well, the crazy thing is, I love that story.
Yeah, me too.
And it was just funny how you talk about in your career how things shift, how things change, how it
Yeah,
evolves, this and that. And in my own career, I've kind of gone like not downstream like it's any less, but gravitating towards students, doing more and more
yeah,
work with students. And not quite to that level what she shared with you, but I've had students come up and just state their aha moments,
yeah.
things where they heard something, they heard a theme for the first time, or
Mm-hmm.
they heard a theme they've heard before, but in your words, the way that
Right.
you put it, the way you convey it. And it's just amazing how many of these books that we have, for adults,
Yep.
if we put them out like for teen
Mm-hmm.
versions for
Yeah.
them, um, you're still going to go through the same trials and tribulations. It's not going to solve all their problems, but they could find some kind of a beacon, some kind of a light
Right.
to
They're
kind
going
of
to be better
say,
equipped.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
They're going to have more tools in their toolkit. And there's brain science behind that, because up until the age of 8, you create, so there are pathways in the brain that create thought patterns that allow you to make choices, or have kind of those shortcuts where you're not even thinking about what you're doing. You're just making an assumption, or you're, jumping to a conclusion, or just taking an action without really considering what the premise behind that is.
Mhm.
And those pathways, those neural pathways, are at their highest production before the age of 8. So most of our internal programming happens by the age of 8. Not that we're, a done deal at that point, but that's a
It's a
big,
foundation. It's a
platform.
huge foundation.
Exactly. And then the next time in our lives when that production, that myelin sheath that goes around these, it's like a superconductor for those thought processes that we have. That next period of time that happens is during our teens. So you can imagine, up until the age of 8, you're having all these formative experiences and creating all these neural pathways that are leading to assumptions and behaviors and feelings and thoughts about the world and you and your place in it. And then the next time is the chaos of the teen years, right? So you're
Yeah.
making all sorts of, bringing all sorts of conclusions to bear and thinking all these things. And that's trying to undo all of those things is the work that you and I and all of our colleagues and cohorts are doing in our adult years, is trying to unravel some of that mess.
Well, I
Because
mean, go
yeah,
ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, because we created those things without having a lot of the framework and tools and support and insights that would have allowed us to make different pathways happen. So now we got to go back when we're not having that, superconductor experience, and try to undo that work. So what would be possible if we could help our young people create those pathways in a much more productive and self-supporting, sustaining way?
Well, the reason this series came about was just my curiosity about conversation. I was always curious about conversations, but even more so
Hmm.
during the pandemic, because people were coming out of their shells more.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and as they were sharing more, because you're most of it is virtual, right? During the
Right.
pandemic, the majority of our contact was like this, or networking events or forums or
Mhm.
speakers, whatever it may be. But it's like when you're in your environment, you're at home, you feel more comfortable. If you're with the
Yeah.
right facilitator in the right group, you feel more
Mhm.
comfortable. So people are just sharing more and more. And
Yeah.
even some conversations I've had on here, um, thoughts of insecurity have come up as adults, and we can all trace that cord back to a particular moment or a particular instance when we were
Correct.
in those formidable years
Right.
that kind of programmed us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. So yeah, and I talk about it in Pain Rebel, which we'll get to in a minute, but I talk about it in Pain Rebel as being the contracts we signed before we had the ability to really consider whether or not that contract was a good
Yeah,
idea or not, right? Do I want to
yeah.
believe this limiting negative belief about myself or the world? Do I want to go into certain situations and believe that that's the only way to make that happen? Of course I don't, but I didn't have the choice back then, the insight, the understanding, so I wasn't able to make that, appropriate decision.
And
So
again,
now,
it's the wherewithal to say to a student or a young person,
hmm,
this isn't going to solve all your problems. I'm not saying it is,
no,
but it's just kind of like, here's some tools.
right,
Because I'm sure whatever you may have gone through, and I'm just
hmm,
assuming here,
hmm,
because it led you to where you are today,
yeah,
there really isn't too much that you would change.
right,
That's a huge assumption. For me,
right,
I was much different before the age of 35, then started working in coaching, and it just evolved who I am.
hmm,
Um, Late bloomer in terms of knowing what I wanted to do, and that led me to be a little quiet and just kind of reserved about everything. But as soon as I
mm,
realized what I wanted, I started firing on all cylinders, making up for lost time.
right,
And even though that started later in life, I wouldn't change that because it made me who I am today. This
hmm,
conversation wouldn't be happening.
right,
Um, Things wouldn't be playing out the way they are now. But why
absolutely,
why chance it at that age? You'd rather like provide them some tools for whatever it may be,
right.
exploration, coping, whatever it may be.
Well, like you said, here's the thing: like life is always going to happen. There's no, there's this fallacy that I think a lot of us are, this fallacy of thinking that we're under, that somehow if we get good enough, smart enough, creative enough, organized enough, punctual enough, almost perfect, that we'll somehow be insulated by tragedy, mayhem, whatever those outside forces may be. Absolutely not. Life is still going to hit you. It's a matter of how hard the hit is going to feel and how long you're going to hold on to the damage that it does.
And
Right.
I mean, and it's come up here before, but there's a lot to be said for obstacles, challenges,
Mm-hmm.
not having a completely, salient, quiet,
Right.
there's something to be said. We don't want to go through it, but there's something to be said when we get to the other
Yeah.
side of those challenges that they kind of refine you or they sharpen your edges or make you more
Yeah.
resilient. I mean,
They do.
when you're going through it, it can be horrible depending on what it is, but I mean, people
Mhm.
have to look to that other side.
They absolutely do, and it's part of, building that toolkit. I've done a lot of work in jails, and I first pitched this concept in a room with a bunch of inmates of saying, look, this is just one tool to put in your toolkit. The problem is if you go out into the woods and all you have is a compass, you're in trouble. You got to have a water bottle, you got to have a compass, you got to have something to make fire with. You need a number of different things for different circumstances that are going to come up, but you're not going to be able to build those tools, find those tools, until you've had the trouble of showing up someplace and you didn't have them. You're like, next time I'm going to pack that tool because I was
Yeah.
really shorthanded when I got
It,
there.
your good intentions and your strong heart are only going to get you so far if you don't have the tools.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So
So,
we
so what
got
was
lost.
the next one?
We're just going to do this. We're going to do this like
Yeah,
roundabout
yeah.
thing, but
Oh yeah,
I'll
it's
quickly
never a
hit.
straight line. I'm gonna be honest right now.
Never. So the next few books. So third was Stuck You. Talked to you about that, and then came Power Play, which is another interesting story we could get lost in. But I actually lost the manuscript. I had handwritten most of the
Oh,
manuscript, and I left it on a plane on my way to a client.
ugh.
And so I had to go back. And one of the things is that for me, when I write something, once it's written, I d- I don't rethink it, right? Like
Mhm.
it's already been written. I checked that box, so I covered that area. So to go back and try to rewrite it, oh, it was my least favorite writing experience because initially I was really in and down for it. And I had speaking engagements that were tied to its production. So I needed to get it finished. And but anyway, but Power Play is a book about what is going on in organizational culture and cultures in general, but especially in organizational cultures in terms of patterns of behavior, dynamics that are happening that are creating problems that then have to be solved, whether by intervention or reorganization, et cetera, and how do we mitigate those things. So it's more toward my corporate audience, but also toward people who are involved in any kind of organization. And then came the fifth book, which is The Passion Project, which was Little Landslides, which talks about my upbringing, the things that have hit me and that formed those pathways for me, those neural pathways, and how that experience of repeated, repetitive trauma informed who I was and who I became and where I've gone in my life. And then at the end of that kind of self revelation was, okay, now if this looks like you, what can you do to help resolve some of those traumas in your life and the way that you hung on to those pieces that are fractured in you. And so that was a big lift, which led to my TEDx talk back in 2018.
What was the title of the talk?
The secret to making life hurt less.
Oof. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Which I thought about titling differently, but when I talked about the actual topic to people, um, people recoiled. And I'll tell you, it was the word forgiveness. When I said the word forgiveness, so many people got tight and angry. I actually had several people say to me, if you name it that, I will never click on it
Hmm.
because anything that has to do with forgiveness, I'm done. I don't want to be told to forgive again. And I found
I could
that
see that.
compelling. Yeah,
Yeah, I could
absolutely.
see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I'd rather prefer a little chaos than something that's wrapped up or set aside. Like
Mm,
forgiveness is just kind of closure.
right.
And I don't think I don't know. I'm programmed that way where I was always good at holding grudges, the type
Yep.
to say, I'll forgive, but I'm not gonna forget kind of thing. Fool
Right.
me once, fool me twice, blah, 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 blah.
Uh-huh.
But no,
Yeah.
that I could see why they were saying that about forgiveness.
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
because sometimes I think they just see it as forgiveness means I forgot and there's no accountability to
Yeah.
whoever the aggressor was, or even if it's me,
Right.
that it's just kind of wrapped up too cleanly. But that's I love the other title as well.
Yeah. So the piece about forgiveness that I found was a subject that I think we need to dig into more and more, which is why I love doing the talk. Is I actually talked about what our colloquial understanding of forgiveness is and how that definition does not serve us because that definition, as you described it, has some sort of permission wrapped up in it.
Mm.
Like somehow, if I forgive you, I think it's okay that you did what you did. That I somehow have made it, I've sanitized the experience. I've invalidated my own pain by allowing you off this proverbial hook, right? And I've joked with clients, they've nicknamed my brand of forgiveness Borgiveness because of B, right? That it's this different brand of forgiveness, which is about letting go of this illusion that you can change an unchangeable past. It's putting down the emotional tie that you have to the act that was committed, or the series of acts, or the relationship, or whatever the piece is that you're trying to forgive, and saying, no longer will I allow that dynamic to drive the pattern of my life, because frankly, that person, if they are so awful, is not worth that. That
Mm.
is, they do not, they took my, as I said in my TED talk, they took my past. I could not allow them to take my present and my future. So it's an act of defiance, in a sense, that isn't really recognized. You know, when you look at it in a religious sense, it's like you're just supposed to forgive. Well, you know, for me, I had to bring the rebel out, which was, no,
Mm.
absolutely not. I will forgive, but not because you deserve it, but because I deserve the freedom of it. And the second piece of it, which you tied in also when you talked about I'll forgive, but I won't forget, is that yes, there is a role of that not forgetting. And that's about boundaries. That's about creating intentional space or rules around who gets close to you and under what conditions, if they are safe or unsafe. If they have proven themselves time and time again to be toxic or to, violate you in certain ways, you can forgive them. You can forgive them, right? You can let go of that tie. You can break that chain, and also say, and you don't get access to me because I
Yeah.
can't trust that you're going to be safe for me. And I think that piece, when I got that piece, all of a sudden I could forgive everyone, because
Yeah.
I didn't have to, it didn't mean anything and invalidate me. It didn't do anything to harm me. But boy, it gave me the freedom to not hold on to that anger and rage and judgment that I was using in the place of boundaries to create that artificial distance between me and another person.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think there is, is this key phrase, buzz phrase lately, like toxic positivity is coming up. But I think
Oh, hate it.
a lot of people look at forgiveness like, oh, it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
If I forgive, I can't, yeah, I can't do that person wrong or society
Right.
wrong by being that person that doesn't forget. It's like, F that. Like,
Yes.
because you're
Thank you.
foregoing your own self-respect, your
Right.
own self-care, like whatever it may be. You're giving up too much of yourself, I think, if you're trying to go
Absolutely.
along with doing the noble thing of,
Right.
whether it's religious or spiritual or whatever it may
Hmm.
be, but you're like, no, forgiveness is what we should be about. I'm like, nah, I don't think so.
It's so hard, because that, I feel like a pendulum swings, right? So we go over to this place of, toxic positivity, as you talk about. I can't stand when people are talking about things as though you don't get to be mad about something because that's somehow a lower vibration, right?
Mm.
No, no, no. You can use your rage to actually elevate your vibration, because rage, and I've said this, and I've done some work with young women who have been sexually trafficked, right?
Mhm.
And we talk, and I've had to prepare the staff before I come in to say, don't worry, I when I first start talking about rage, you're going to freak out, but I'm going to get to a place where you're going to like what I have to say.
Mm.
Because these
Yes.
girls, these young women are angry, right? They're really angry, and they've been taught that they shouldn't be so angry, because this outburst is, just, it's not healthy for them. They got to let it go. And what I say is that rage is the most beautiful emotion, because what rage is saying, I deserved better, that my soul and my spirit were eviscerated, and that was not right. And I am proclaiming at the top of every mountain I can get to that that is not permissible, right? Like that was not okay. And that's what rage is. That's what's informing us about the acts that we take based on the feeling of rage. Those are not cool, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that's where we have to differentiate between a feeling and an action, right? The
Yes.
feeling of rage is beautiful. The acts that come out of rage are not. And that's where I think in a lot of ways
Absolutely.
our
I get
society
you.
gets fractured, right? With these
Yeah.
mass shootings and all of these things that are
Mm,
happening are because we don't allow for the feeling of the rage and the respect that it deserves and the healing that needs to take place as a result. And instead it just gets channeled into an action to give it the validation it's been seeking,
yes. I love
right?
that. I
Yeah.
love that because I've always thought like even in relationships, whether it was like
Hmm.
friendships or romantic, I'm like I always appreciated the arguments because then you realize where the other person stood.
Yes,
Because all
absolutely.
the time they have maybe this rage, maybe they're unhappy,
Hmm.
whatever it may be, but they're trying to keep the peace because that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah,
But
but we're
I
not supposed to
swear
do
I'm
that.
not I swear I'm not like a sadist, but when the argument happened, it's like, okay, finally, now I know where
Yeah,
you actually stand because you let a little of that rage out. And
right,
maybe it's just words, maybe it was some screaming, whatever it may be, no violence or anything like that. But
right.
it's like finally you just let go of what you were holding inside.
The
So
pretense.
the pretense. So I
Yeah.
appreciate what you're saying. Like rage is beautiful. It's like, yeah, because when you get that, it's almost like I just picked up Susan Cain's new book on longing, and it's
Mm.
funny in that it's similar in that people get the wrong impression of it.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about rage or
Hmm.
longing, it's like you're losing sight of the beauty of what's driving that. Like that there's something
Correct.
that you're longing for so much. That's beauty. That there's something that you're raging and pissed
Right.
off about
Yep.
that much. That's beautiful. Like you
Right.
said, it's what we do with that. Like even jealousy, that you're
Exactly.
jealous about something. It's like, what is that about?
Right.
Show me what it is you feel. But the way you act on it, that's what gets us in trouble.
Right. What we tend to do also with a lot of emotions is that we put them into or categories. We are either angry or we are
Mm,
pleased. We are either sad or we are happy. No, we can be both. We are both. If we actually look at the complexity of the human brain and experience, we are multiple things on the same topic all the time. And when we don't allow for the complexity, the layers of those emotions, we end up doing ourselves a disservice. And when you talk about the idea that, something is necessarily bad, anger is bad, sadness is bad. No, sadness is good. Staying in sadness and never resolving the thing that's creating the sadness, that's bad. But there can be sadness along with happiness. And that's a lot of what I talk about in Pain Rebel, which is the book that I've written most recently, back in 2020, is that there is this, we don't want to look at the pain, or we either want to bury ourselves in it and drown in it and be in a perpetual pity party about, the woe is me of the crosses I bear and the burdens on my shoulders, or we want to completely avoid it and not talk about it and just blow through that gateway. And what we actually have to appreciate, and it's one of my favorite movies, Collateral Beauty, is that in the pain there is such opportunity for growth. There is such a journey that has to take place as we go through those checkpoints to look at what is causing us pain, what is bringing that pain to bear, and are we holding on to it for so long that we could be addressing that in another way that would give us so much more freedom.
Jesus, we just covered in like a half hour, like enough for like a 10 episode series, just different
There you
tangents.
go.
But no, I love it. It's beautiful. Before, and it is the last book that we're going to be
Yes,
discovering. But before we jump into
correct.
that, I'm always curious, what is it from your past going far back? You don't have to go through
Mm,
every year, but what is
right.
it from your past that you think got you to where you are doing the work you do? Was whether it was education,
Yeah,
whether it was family. I'd love to hear about what started you on the path and just kind of like a
right.
brief overview of whether, you went to school, whether,
Yeah.
the different organizations you might have worked at, but that led to this mix of the work you're doing,
Right.
especially across all these different groups.
Correct. So I think, to give, Pain Rebel, and, gives a little bit of an account of it, and Little Landslides does a deep dive for my actual experiences. But I'll say this, I think what led me to this path is, from a spiritual perspective, a thematic perspective, is that I watched how people not standing in their own true and clear power allowed me to experience pain that never should have happened. And for them to be stuck in pain that they could have escaped from. But they didn't see what they were in charge of. They didn't have the insights, the tools, the clarity
Mm,
to be able to see where they began and ended, and how they could put down some of those hurts. And so they handed them to other people. So they held fire and it burned, so they handed it to other people to stop burning, but then everybody burned. And so for me, my core is trying to come to people to alleviate suffering, to be able to show people the pathway to their own empowerment, never power over, always power from within, so that they can lead more productive lives and stop that domino effect of having pain and handing it and handing it and handing it, whether it's through generations, in communities, across cultures, whatever it is, to try to put that down, to create that clarity and that healing. And from a tactical perspective, I kind of did what I call the bears in the porridge and the beds kind of thing. Of, I went to the first step, and it was, too hard, which was human resources. So I thought, oh, I'll go into human resources. That's how I'll help people. But it was too sanitized. It was too much procedural and on payroll and
yes,
benefits and
yes.
whatever. And I thought, no, this isn't my space. So then I turned around and I said, okay, I'm going to go into therapy. I'm going to, get my master's in marriage and family therapy. I worked in, the addiction, system here in Connecticut during my internships. And I got to tell you, I left that and thought, okay, this is too hot, right? Like, this is way too deep in this, right? This is like, I'm seeing the ghosts of Christmas past every moment, when I turn around. I can't do this. The heat's too high on this one. And then I backed up and I thought, what else can I do? How can I pull these two things together and make something of it? And then I pursued my doctorate in educational leadership. And I thought, oh my gosh, so I'm looking at people from the inside out and systems through my master's program. I'm looking at the business application of how people come together and work within organizations and with one another. And I'm looking at it through a leadership lens, like understanding what that takes to be able to bring people through that. And that's what led to the career. It was one of these, like, I shook it up, and that's what came out, which led to my, the coaching work that I've done, the speaking that I've done, the teaching that I've done, is that I've tried to be as authentic to my experiences and my insights to be able to deliver on that first promise that came from my early experiences.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Yeah, I can relate to that kind of chaos of the path, but in the end, you
Right.
look back and it's all applicable. So that's amazing. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, we can jump into the book now if you'd like. Just
Absolutely.
because if we don't, then I'm just gonna keep asking you questions and going down these different tangents. But
Listen, John, we can run this however you want to run this. But you said, I can't believe you're game. I'm like, I'm game. Where are we
no, I
going?
know, and
So
I
yeah,
appreciate that. But
yeah,
yeah, Pain Rebel. I mean,
yeah.
what was it that um what was it that actually triggered you wanting to write this? I mean, you've
Right.
shared some of your experiences, but what
Hmm.
was like the point where you're like, this is what I want to write, this is what I want to put out there?
Absolutely. So, on I had written Little Landslides. I'd done the TEDx talk, but it was in preparing for the TEDx talk. It was in the conversations that came from my public speaking engagements and the coaching I was doing, the seminars I was giving on Little Landslides, on the rise up through trauma, on looking at how do you, build back a life when, the foundation was cracked, right? And I started, so many of those lessons, so many of those conversations led to the model that I was using and had been using with clients for a while, on this idea about contracts. And I said, I got to put this down on paper. I got to put this out to people. So even if they aren't looking to work with me individually, or they just want to kind of do a little on their own before they come to me, so a little more elevated and ready for a deeper conversation, I could give them the tools for that. So I started writing it before the TEDx talk back in March of 2018. And I had it, fairly, I was an eclectic writer back then, where I would just kind of, I'd have a thought, I'd write it down, I'd have a thought, I'd write it down, and have this
Mhm.
big mess of notes. And then I'd say, okay, how am I going to put this together? How is this going to become a, coherent whole? And I had done a lot of that. I had a somewhat of a structure, but it wasn't in kind of manuscript form, but I had a lot of the guts of it written. And, the talk was in March of 2018. You may or may not know this, but I was in a motor vehicle accident on August 31st of 2018, which was just a number of months. It was actually a week after the TEDx talk was published. It took 6 months for the TEDx talk to hit the streets. And it was in a rollover, side impact car crash, which left me with a traumatic brain injury. So everything stopped. Everything stopped in my life. I mean, I had, pre-existing clients, and I had, gigs that I already had scheduled, but it changed the person that I am and how I come to things. So, I have all sorts of physical and mental, issues now that I didn't have prior to the accident. And I had planned on having that fall be the time I was going to pull Pain Rebel together and make it and put it out there as kind of an addendum to the TEDx talk, and a follow on from Little Landslides. And that had to be completely rethought. I couldn't look at screens. I was having a hard time reading. My handwriting changed, like all sorts of things had happened as a result of the accident. And so I would go back to it and touch it a little, go back to it and touch it a little. But it took until, the pandemic hit, and I looked around me and I saw all the suffering, and I saw the pain that was happening, and I saw the people. You talk about people being in like their home environment, so maybe they're a little more open to being vulnerable. I feel like it was a comprehensive collective trauma that we had all been hit with, that then brought up all of the other individual and collective traumas that we had all been burying or
Mm.
accommodating for or
Oh,
covering up.
yeah.
And all of a sudden, coaches and therapists couldn't like turn their phones off quick enough, you know what I mean? Because people were coming to us. And I said, this is the time. I have got to get Pain Rebel out the door. So, with a lot of struggle, a whole lot of tears, frustrations, because again, my brain just does not work in the way that it once did. I put it out and got it out on the streets. Yeah.
Oof.
So that was the process, and the purpose behind it was just this imperative that I felt that it was something that was needed, and I was the only person who could do it in this particular way, because these are my particular thoughts, right?
When was it published?
June of 2020.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so right in the midst of the pandemic and lockdown.
Yeah, and I mean, still relatively in the midst of just uncertainty and not, no one really knowing where the end of this was. Like, it's
Correct.
like when it started, it was like, okay, we'll all go home in March of 2020 for like 2
Couple
weeks.
weeks.
This will
Yeah.
this will be
Yeah.
over.
See you
And then
soon.
meanwhile, it was just cases going up,
Yep.
and here we
Deaths, and
are.
then yeah,
Here
and then
we
we
are
had
over
yeah.
2 years later.
Crazy, and still going back into things, right? Still having, all sorts of questions and challenges to the processes that we're following in this. People are, feeling the trauma of going back to work. The entire landscape of work has changed. No longer are people like, yeah, sure, I'll go into the office 5 days a week. They're like, peace out. I showed you I could work from home 5 days a week. Now you can have me work from home at least three. And that whole tenor changed, and it's been huge for people, I think, kind of listening to their own voice, trying to find work-life balance, all of that is all again, the collateral beauty of a really tragic situation, of all these beautiful silver linings that have come as a result of the pandemic, which do not diminish the terrible, awful, horrible human and other costs to it, but it's also it's
Yeah.
and
I love that phrase, collateral beauty.
Yeah. Favorite
Um,
movie. If you haven't watched it, I mean, Will Smith stars in it, so I apologize. I know he's persona non grata in a lot of circles right now, but
yeah,
he has made some amazing movies and he starred in that, and it is by far, my favorite movie because of that message of looking
that's
for that.
that's why. I mean, that's why his it's not excusing him whatsoever.
No.
I think it's bullshit what he did. That just, especially
Sure.
you're on the biggest stage ever and you're going to do something like that. That just shows you how fucked up somebody is in the head.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think
Eh,
what
I-
it
I-
shows is it's a response. I think there's so many ands. Like I posted a couple of things that people had written about it because there isn't one perspective on that fits the entire
Mm,
story.
yeah,
There are so many aspects of that which I, as a white woman, am not, able to say and to speak to in the way that I, respectfully could. But there are so many aspects to what happened there and what led to that from an individual, from a group, from a systemic
exactly.
perspective, that not, one size doesn't fit all. But it was clearly a bad situation, and it had I hope a lot of positive results, but it had some negative ones as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about, this is a collective trauma that kind of brought out, and I'm paraphrasing because my
Yeah.
memory is just absolute crap. But it kind of brought out everybody's own individual
Hmm.
struggles.
Yes.
I've gone through that as well. I've talked about that on here, my own mental health. So
Yeah.
it's just it's amazing. I don't know. There's just so much to talk about here.
There's so many
My
layers. Yeah.
God.
And I think,
There-
and his response to me, I mean, in watching it from the outside, was a perfect demonstration at some level of a trauma response, and one of those automatic um, responses that we don't pause to consider, right? Like we're in the moment and we're led by, like I tell my clients, if you feel it from your forehead to your gut, step away from the computer, put the phone down, because nothing good is going to come from that. If you've got
Mm,
tightness, or your heart's racing, or you got a headache burning, you are operating with emotion first and intellect second, and you need to like slow your roll, because
yeah.
nothing, good things are not going to come from the next action you're going to take. I mean, maybe by chance, but you're not going to be really grounded in that. And what I saw in him was just this, again, amplified reaction to something which may have been theoretically appropriate in terms of calling someone out for, a bad action, but
Yeah.
there's just so much, there's so much
Yeah,
complexity to it.
no one can claim to understand what was fully there. It was wrong
Mm-mm.
in and of itself, but I'm just curious about what the background is there. But
Right.
in any case, what you had said just really brought up for me just the experience of going through the pandemic as a father
Mm-hmm.
to young kids, and then this
Right.
search that I'm going on about like what it means to be a man and what, your
Yes.
responsibilities, because I look at the past, my dad, his generation, what they were going through versus what we're going through, and it's just completely different.
Completely. Yeah.
It's the proliferation of social media, and you see everything that's going on around the world in real time, actual
Mm-hmm.
video. You're not waiting, weeks or whatever, or days
Right.
to see pictures. You're seeing stuff play out in real time. Then there's a pandemic. Then I got young kids. So there's just, I don't know. The
There's
the
so
pandemic was
much.
just like
Yeah.
very eye opening, and then there's
Yeah.
like the pressure of what does it mean to be a dad? What does it mean to be a man? Blah 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 blah. So
Yeah.
I mean that was hard for me during the pandemic. So it just, I like the way you say it was just like this collective that we went through, but then all these individual
Absolutely. It.
experiences were bubbling up, needs that
Yeah.
we had.
Right. I think I think a lot of people talked about, we're all in the same boat. We're all in the
I
same
love when people
ocean,
say that. It's like,
right? We're all in the
yeah,
same ocean, but we're not in the same boat, because, like, I remember talking early on in the pandemic. I, got on a number of calls trying to support some of my clients and colleagues around the world. And, one of the things I said is, look, my experience as the mom of a college freshman and a high school junior is a very different experience, and a work from home mom, where I'm just like, I'm like, welcome to my world, because I've been working from home for 21 years, like this
yeah,
is not any different to me. I just can't go out to coffee anymore. And so, that was very different, but that's very different than your experience. than his experience and her experience. Like,
Yes.
everybody's got a different experience about that. And so to say that somehow I have the corner on the narrative for what this
Mm.
looks like is it's insanity. It's just not
Yeah.
how that worked. And I think what I the message I hope to impart to people through Pain Rebel and talking about it, during the pandemic and now, is that looking inside to give compassion and looking outside to give compassion is where we start in any healing journey. To say, of course a person would be feeling like that given that background. Of course that person would be, I would be feeling that this would be happening. Of course, it makes perfect sense based on programming experiences, what those tracks look like in our brains. But the second part is equally important, which is accountability to fix it.
Mhm.
So you can't have accountability without compassion. You can't have compassion without accountability. That's both internal and external. And those are like the hallmark, pieces that I actually sent a client of mine who was having a struggle with it. I sent her a water bottle with like the words compassion and accountability equally placed around the water bottle. So every time she turned it, she was like, oh yeah, can't forget that. Oh yeah, can't forget that, because it shows up so negatively when we hold people accountable without compassion, or we hold compassion without holding them accountable, and we have to have both.
And I think, yeah, that applies to yourself as well as
Yes,
others because,
correct.
hopefully, and it probably won't work out this way because we always forget lessons, so we could say during the pandemic, "Oh my
Right,
god, this is what I realized when I come out of this. I'm so a new person, blah, blah, blah."
right.
But I mean, I think that should apply to us as well. I think
It
even when
does.
it comes to mental health, obviously I want people to listen, but at the same time, I have a there has to be accountability of me, from me, that
Right.
I have to speak up and share as
Yeah.
comfortably as possible when I do feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. But, people have a responsibility to themselves to speak for themselves, to speak up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
No one can come and meet us 100% where we are. We have to fight for ourselves at the same time. So
Correct.
I look at this accountability in a new way. Like you said, mixing
Mm.
compassion with accountability, but
Mm-hmm.
it also has to be to yourself as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's where
Because we
it
were so
starts.
good at keeping facades like everything is fine.
Right. Yeah,
So, if
absolutely.
you're not showing any of that, you can't be surprised when people that may have wanted to reach out haven't done so because you're
Right.
not showing them where you really are.
Correct. And I think, going back to your piece about, what does it mean to be a man? I think one of the disservices that we've done to young men and therefore, older men, is that, especially men in my generation, right? I look at my peers, is this discomfort with vulnerability, of being authentic and transparent and therefore honest, right?
Mm,
With emotions, with fears, with apprehensions. Like, it's okay to be angry. Oh, but it's not. But it's not okay to be
yeah.
fearful. Like, all of these permissions that have not been granted to the mental health journey of men, in at least in our culture, I think has done such a disservice, and it's led to a dynamic that has, again, been centuries long, right, in its coming. But looking at the amount of violence that's happening, it's again understandable given the lack of tools and understanding in the framework within which, young men are brought up, and what kinds of messages that they're given. So I feel like I'm hoping, I want our women to be empowered in the ways that we're trying to, empower women. I just want to see an and where we're also paying equal and passionate attention to what are we doing with men, because I feel like
Yeah.
if we keep going in this direction of being, kind of angry about, the failings of men in some of the ways that,
Mhm.
they have been failing, right, and the
Yeah, yeah.
violence and all of that,
Absolutely, absolutely.
that but if we keep focused on that and don't appreciate the pain and the trauma and the confusion and the lack of resources and tactics and, and support that we're giving them, then we've just vilified, a segment of our humanity and haven't actually resolved the problem. And so I feel like
Yeah,
there has to be that discourse as well.
absolutely. Because I think there is just that generalization that if we looked at a certain segment of the population, men in this case, in a certain way in the past,
Mhm.
that's the way they all are.
Right.
Um, and some of it is that perception that's put out there, the narrative, wherever you may see it, and some of it is our own doing. Like, I have a responsibility. If I have
Right.
needs, I have a responsibility to
Right.
myself to seek
Mhm.
out the tools. And admittedly, like, I've been on that journey all my life.
Mhm.
Not severe enough for me to seek out help or therapy or anything like that. But then during the
Right.
pandemic, it's like, okay, that facade,
Yeah.
you don't have
Bye-bye.
any energy left for that
Yeah.
facade
Nothing.
because shit is falling apart. Like,
Right. Exactly. You're like just grabbing things as they're flying through the air.
exactly.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate that. And I think it is fear on our side where yes, we'll look weak, like we're not in control, like we're taking away from other people like it's a zero-sum game that if we mention that we need help or
Right.
anything, that we're taking away from a woman that may need help or a child that may need help.
Right.
And I think that's what it was during the pandemic is like your kids come to you, you're taking care of them. You as the man or whatever are taking care of your wife and the stresses she may
Right.
have. And then you turn around, you're like, holy shit, like,
What's left for me? Yeah. What do I got
yeah.
here?
And it's
And
and it's
yeah.
it's I think for me, just speaking for myself, it's not even about what I need
Right.
to come my way, but just what my own responsibility as well, what I should be
Right.
expressing.
Right. I remember this when I worked in addiction services, my mentor there, used the airplane analogy to understand
Yes.
that, for codependence, right? For people who
Yes.
have an addict in their midst, they
Hmm.
become very martyrdom and self-sacrificial to the extent that they feel like they're doing the addict, good by being so supportive when in fact them not taking care of themselves first is what actually perpetuates the addiction cycle. So there's really the sense that you've got to put your oxygen mask on first. You've got to figure out man, woman, child, whoever you are, you come first in your life because you're not going to have the capacity to share with others if you aren't practicing solid self-care. It is a
Yeah.
message that needs to be drummed in over and over again that somehow it's not about self-indulgence, it's about
Absolutely.
self-care,
Absolutely not. Yep.
it's
Yep.
this piece about making sure that you have a tank full enough to be able to take your party wherever they need to go. If you're not doing that, it's actually unkind and ungenerous to the
Mm.
people around you because you're not giving from a place of abundance, you're giving from
Yes.
a place of lack. And
Yes.
whenever we give from a place of lack, what sets in? Resentment.
Yeah. No, I
Right.
could see that. I could see that.
Like,
Because I
I
mean,
gave you all that. And you know what I
yeah,
mean? But like, hold on a
yeah,
second. I didn't tell
yeah,
you to give me all that. You need to give
yeah,
to you too. Right.
absolutely. And that's where I think that perception of, I'm not saying all men, but
Yeah.
certain men where it's like, okay, this is, I guess, the role that we have to play. This is what it has to look like. And I've realized that once I started taking care of my own needs, like you can just breathe, the tension leaves your
Yeah.
body. You can be more who you are. You can deliver
Right.
more of who you are. You have a little more energy. It's just, I don't know. I just think it's a powerful message that should get out there, not just for men, but anybody that kind of has
Mhm.
to breathe.
Right.
Um, so
Absolutely.
Bridget, what does Pain Rebel look like? Can you give an overview of the book? What is
Sure.
like the arch of the book, the arc of the book, the story arc, or
Yeah.
the path that you lay out for anybody who's reading it?
So in all of my books, I write how I speak. So when you pick up my book or you listen to it on audio, you are having a conversation with me. So I'm going through kind of giving you a sense of why am I thinking like this? What evidence
Mm,
do I have? What are the stories behind where this comes from? What's the science behind it? What's the just human storytelling arc behind it? And how did we get here? So how do we get to this place where Pain Rebel was needing to be written, right? Like what evidence do we have out there that we are not handling pain well? Is it the addiction rates? Is it violence? Is it suicide rates? Like, what is it that's showing us that we have a problem with pain? We have a really broken relationship to what pain means. Do we need to, are we trying to numb it away? Are we trying to ignore it? Are we, jumping into it with, full zest and just staying in it? We need to fix that. And then what it takes you through are all the tactics and thought shifts. So I call myself a cage rattler because that Hotel California song, right? Is that you have the key to let yourself out. You just don't know where it is, right? You didn't realize it. You've just been sitting in there with the key in your hand and you didn't know how. And so what I do with people is help shift their thoughts to kind of challenge some of those pathways that they've created over time, that they've convinced themselves are the only way to see how things really are, and see instead how things could be with one shift of thought, with one kind of opening up to an and or an or in the ways that they're conceiving of things, and then give them the roadmap to get them out of that cage. So that's really what Pain Rebel does, is it challenges those beliefs. It gives you different ways of thinking. I give you a lot of personal stories, a lot of stories from clients and friends, to say, you're not in this alone. This is what we all go through. This is what
Mm.
how we got to this moment, and we can get ourselves out if we take, thoughtful and decisive action. And then it gives a roadmap for recreating those contracts that I talked about challenging, finding out what they are, challenging what they are, and then writing new ones that create an entirely new life, that they really just change everything. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients come to me and I'll ask them, oh, so they'll tell me something that went wrong. And I'll say, which contract was that? They're like, oh, I know, it's that old
Yeah.
contract I was listening to. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
they'll say, or they'll come back and they'll tell me a story about how they did this new amazing thing and they got into this different place in their relationship or their life. And I say, okay, what new contract were you following when you did that? And they'll tell me the new contract. So it's a guidepost, a beacon for being able to get to that place that, we all want to be, because this is one short life. And, one of my favorite quotes from Mary Oliver is, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And we lose track. And I know I'm older than you, but I hit 50 last year, and I got to say, it is that gateway, that point, that taking off point is, oh my gosh, like, what have I done?
Mm.
What have I done to this point? And what level of awareness is it going to take from me to make sure that the remaining years that I have on this planet are used and used well? That I have left an impact, that I have lived my life with passion and purpose, that I have made good use of this one wild and precious life.
I love that.
Thank you.
I love
Thanks.
that only because I think that's a good reminder people need to hear.
Yeah.
I think it's one that they need to live.
Right.
I think what most of us, and me for most of my life, I was living very tentatively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, haven't nailed it, but I love the trial and error of the experimentation of just
Right.
trying different things and seeing what fires me up. Like, my practice has evolved over the last 5, 6, 7 years, where I'm just
Mm.
like, oh no, that's not for me. Now I'm going to float over here, see what's going on. I think
Right.
there's just so much here. There's so much
Yeah.
here. But
Right.
I
We'll
think
have we'll have
there's
a take two someday.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely. You got enough books.
There
Um,
you go.
but I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it has to do with just this idea of perfection. Like, you need to nail it. That, I've brought it up ad nauseum here, where it's just kind of like, again, that
Yeah.
programming of the younger life. You
Right.
gotta you gotta get grades. You gotta
Yeah.
get grades. You gotta get that A. Then your path is gonna look like college. Then it's gonna look like
Right.
this. Then it's gonna be like the two kids, the white picket fence,
Mm-hmm.
where we're living by that script that we think we have to go by. Like me, when I was like, what does it mean to be, what does it look like to be like the real dad? What does it look like to
Right.
like the real man? There's this pressure that we put on ourselves. And at this point, for me, I gotta say, like, nobody told me this is what you have to do as a dad.
Right.
Nobody said that definitively to me. I was reading things in society and
Yeah.
I took those as, okay, that's my cue.
Yeah.
But no
You
one ever
gathered
told me.
information and then you and
Gathered
then you compiled
information.
it.
Exactly. That
Right.
was on me. Um, but I think there is this stress of, like, what a perfect life looks like, that it
Mm-hmm.
has to look a certain way. What is that goal that we have to work towards? But we lose sight of, like, those moments. We lose sight of the journey.
Right.
Again, my whole thing is, I think we skip this. We try to stick to scripts too often, where we
Yeah.
kind of, and in that path of, as a young child, this is what you have to look like.
Yeah.
We lose
It's
sight of
limiting.
who we are.
Yeah. It's
Because I think,
limiting. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I think when I've had clients have real breakthroughs in their lives, it's when they've kind of gone back and rediscovered who
Mm-hmm.
they are.
Oh
Like
yeah.
the curious child, the child of
Yep.
imagination, the child of wonder, where they were following a script to or a contract.
Yeah.
They signed off for life's contract, that script
Yeah.
that's handed to them, and they kind of lose themselves. And a lot
Right.
of times when they finally reach that place of fulfillment, it's that they've reached back and said, this is who I was all about. This is now
Exactly.
who I want to bring more into what I'm doing. It's not this diversion of this is where my soul is going and this is what
Hmm.
society wants me to do.
Right. And it's taking off those layers. There's a quote, and I'm
Reprogramming.
yeah, it's reprogramming, but it's not about creating yourself. It's about peeling away the layers that are
Mm,
covering who you are.
yes.
Right. And I think that's what happens is over time with all those contracts we sign and then all the actions that we take based on those contracts that make it, we perceive that that's reality. That's the way it should be,
Yes.
that we end up not being able to challenge and go back and look at that. You reminded me of a story, and to get a little, I won't get too religious, but a little spiritual on you. So, I used to be a CCD teacher years ago, and I had first and second graders. So talk about in the prime of forming those ideas. And one of them came to me and said, Miss Bridget, what's heaven like? And I said, listen, first of all, I haven't been, so I couldn't really, give you a write up. And also, I want you to go home and ask your parents that question, because as much as I'm helping to, form your religious identity, I'm also just a teacher, right? I'm not your
Mm,
parents, so I want you to go back and ask them that same question. So, but I'll give you my answer, and my answer is that when you get to that gate, you're asked three questions. Did you have fun? Did you use the gifts that I gave you to the best of your abilities? And did you try to leave every situation better than you found it? And if your answer to that question is each one of those questions is yes, whether it's a huge yes or a moderate yes, come on in. There's puppies, there's chocolate, right? Like we got it all. But I
yeah.
think a lot of times we get lost on the way to that we forget about having fun, that we forget about using our gifts to the best of our abilities. And we forget that our deal is to try to leave every situation better than we found it, is to try to leave the best of ourselves whenever and however we can.
Yeah, but if you think about it, no one says that to anybody in school.
Right. Right.
Like, it's not in a curriculum.
Nope.
If they're lucky, the professor, the teacher, whoever it may
Yeah.
be, has that. What if they're lucky? They had somebody like your CCD students, right?
Right.
That puts it that way. But it's like,
You
how
forget.
often? How often do you forget? I mean, you don't
Yeah.
even know that.
Right.
You don't even know that unless
Absolutely.
somebody tells you along the way, or
Yep.
you realize it as an adult the way I did. I'm like, holy shit! Like those three questions, I didn't think about it that way, but that's the
Yeah.
way I try to live my life now.
Mm-hmm.
Kids aren't told that,
No, so they
you know?
think it's about the Ferrari that they finally get to own, or the house on the beach, or like whatever the monetary thing is, or how many likes they get on some social media post, or
Mm,
like whatever it is. No, like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what job you ended up holding. It doesn't matter if you were a trash collector or the president of the United States. If you can't answer those three questions appropriately, then what life did you actually lead? And it's not about heaven or hell, and that was just in that context
yeah,
was the
yeah.
was the piece about it. But it's about what kind of life did you actually live. My dad died at 45, my mother and my stepfather died both at the age of 69, did not live long lives, did not live super happy lives. They had happy moments, they had
Mm.
some joys along the way. But when I look at, did they have those three things in mind, they lost sight of those, right? In many different occurrences. And damned if I'm going to do the same. That for me would be the biggest crime.
What were they again, Bridget?
45 and 69.
No, no, no. The
Oh,
questions.
oh, the three questions. They
Did you have
were: did you
fun?
have fun? Did you use your gifts to the best of your abilities? And did you leave every situation and person better than you found them?
Hmm.
And again, we don't have ultimate control over the last, but we sure as heck have a contribution that we can give, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say, like, thinking back to my parents, grew up in a blue collar household. My
Yep.
dad passed away about a year and a half ago. My mom's
I'm
still
sorry.
here. Um, but looking, and I still say that my dad is still my greatest leadership coach. And
Mm,
he didn't give me lessons per se. Like he never sat me down and said, "Today I'm gonna tell you about," or
right.
anything like that. But
He
it
lived
was
by
more
example.
by example. And he
Yep.
was anybody that knew him knew like he was always having fun.
Right.
that he was always trying to leave people with a sense of just
Hmm.
enjoyment of life. So for me, it's like, I
He
think he may
lived
have
that.
passed. Yeah, he lived that, and because of their sacrifices, I'm in a better spot financially than they ever were, but,
Right.
like, it's their win as well.
Hmm.
And looking back, it's like I wouldn't have wanted to grow up in any other that I know of, right? I mean,
Right.
my own experience, because they could answer those questions
Right.
where they had fun, they did the best they could, and they tried to leave everything better than they found it. I mean, that's
Right.
what I just realized those are 3 solid foundational keys for
Yeah.
just the measure of, again, it depends who you ask. Some may say the
Yeah.
Lamborghini, the mansion, the this and that, but
Sure.
that's a great measure. That's a great just
I think it's a
3 simple
grounding measure.
questions.
It's a
Yeah.
grounding measure, and it allows, and I challenge my clients when they're thinking about, where they're going in their career, their next step or whatever, is I pull them back to that. But you got to answer those three questions. At the end of the day, those are the three questions that guide a life. You can make a
Yeah.
living, you can do all these things. You can also want the Lamborghini, you can also want the
Oh,
beach
yeah, of
house. You can
course,
do
of
those
course.
things. You can have those. It's not about
Absolutely.
I have to live a life of, of
You don't have
pain
to be a
and
monk.
right,
Like,
exactly.
you don't have to
But you can do those three things amidst that. It's if you sacrifice everything else, sacrifice those three things for everything else, that's when I feel like that there needs to be a course
Yes.
correction, because that's where you end up, hitting 50, 60, 70 years old and go, what did I do with my life? What did I do with my time?
So, Bridget, do you have the, I don't know if you know them by memory, you don't have to list them all or if you have the book handy, but are there a couple examples of chapter titles or what the
Oh,
themes may be in the book, just to get a sense of now within that broad scope that you laid out, what are some of
right.
those kind of targets
Well,
of
I actually have the
concentration?
book in front of me. So one of the things that I lost in the accident is memory. But here's the book. Here's Pain Rebel, and I think one of them that we just talked about is the title of the chapter is It's Terminal, which is talking about the fact that no one gets out of here alive,
Hmm.
and that if looking at your life you recognize that there's not going to be at the end of the day some evaluation of, oh, did you hold that grudge well, you know what I mean, like so what are you actually living for? You gotta start that. The releasing obligation chapter is about forgiveness. It's about that new brand of forgiveness that a lot of people miss, that they're not recognizing is holding them back from so many places. I can't tell you how many of my clients, executive level, like I mean CEO level people, they are being held back in their careers and their lives because they're holding on to grudges and resentments that are blocking them from being able to really embrace the full force and power of their spirit, their intellect, their passions for things. So I think that is huge. And one of my favorite parts of the book. Can I read it to you?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so it's called the Pain Rebel Creed, and I included it because it came to me one night as I was thinking through, what this book meant to me, and why did I write it? How did all this come to be? And I realized that there's a creed that I wanted everyone to live by. Like, if you're going to be a pain rebel, what does it mean? And here it says, I am a pain rebel. I choose to own my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors because I know that they hold my joy and embody my gratitude. I acknowledge that awareness equals choice and choice equals power. I commit to unearthing my unconscious drives and contracts so that I can choose deliberately and flourish in my personal, peaceful power. I invest in myself and my bountiful potential by rewriting my contracts and devoting my energy to healthy new contracts. I acknowledge that my old contracts helped me to survive. I honor my path and let go of shame for the pain I held before I knew more. I deploy my guard, my superhero, and my healer when faced with trauma. I construct agreements in the place of expectations, committing to following my wants and not shackled by my shoulds. I deliberately build boundaries so I can forgive myself and others for our misdeeds without being unsafe mentally, emotionally, or physically. I actively question my thinking, adopting a curiosity stance to root out cognitive distortions that undermine my clarity and beauty. I passionately and purposefully drive toward my blissful destiny, letting pain come and go, embracing its lessons with my steadfast strength. I come from, walk in, and toward love, knowing that happiness, peace, and abundance are my birthright. So that
See,
is the message of Pain Rebel.
and it's amazing how powerful that is, and it's also amazing how internal that is.
Yes.
That you can find happiness in all those things, paying attention to them, experimenting with them, experiencing them. But
Hmm.
we always spend so much time looking outward to what's
Yes.
going to fulfill us, to what's going to make us successful, to what's going to make us happy. It's always about what's out there coming in and never, rarely about diving into me to see what I can find and bring out.
Right. And that is the path to true happiness. You know, they did a study, a number of years ago, and they've updated the numbers, but they talk about happiness, the path toward joy, and that people think it's going to come from money and success and, acquisitions and possessions. And what they found was that up to at that time it was $70,000, depending on what
Yeah.
area you're in and kind of where it is, might be more like $100,000. But once you get to that number, if you're making 70 grand a year, you're making 80, you're making
Mhm.
100 grand a year, depending on your context, you have your basic needs met, you're able to pay your bills, you're able, our threshold for what needs are, like an
Yes.
iPhone, are much higher than they were when, I was growing up. But
Yeah.
but our needs are met, right? And our basic wants are met. We're able to go on a vacation. We're not worrying about whether or not the electric bill is going to be turned off. The level of joy that people experience at $70,000 a year to $7 million a year is no different.
Mm.
There is no increase at that delta. Once you get to the point where you feel, like in Maslow's hierarchy, a sense of
Yes.
safety,
Yes.
as soon as you get past safety,
Mhm.
then the happiness does not correspond to the money.
Yes.
So everything else has to come from within.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yes, exactly. I've heard that. I heard about that study, and I heard it was 70,000. Even the latest version that I heard, or the latest number I heard, was 70,000.
Okay.
Uh, and
I
it
was
is
thinking with
funny.
inflation, it's probably a little higher now with
Yeah,
gas
yeah,
prices the way they are.
but yeah, I
But
think it
yeah.
was 70,000 2 months ago. Now it's like 130,000 with gas
Hmm.
prices. Um,
Exactly.
but no, that stands out because it makes complete sense.
Hmm. But people think, that, and I think one of the things that, as leaders, if some of your listeners are, corporate executives, I was having this conversation with another consultant yesterday, and the idea that you can somehow shackle people to your organization by paying them more money,
Mm,
once you exceed that number, you have to recognize that you've got to put up more than a number. You've
yeah,
got
but
to
they're
put up,
they're they're counting on the
culture.
fact that no one's going to know that number.
Right. But the
Because
point
we're
is,
we're still
yeah,
under the misperception that 130 is better than 70 or whatever it may be.
correct. But they've
Yeah,
shown, and that you're seeing in this mass exodus and, the mass resignation, right, is that
yeah,
you're finding that people are saying enough. If you're
yeah,
not going to help me have quality of life, if you're not going to give me a good boss, if you're not going to give me work life, balance, job satisfaction, passion, and purpose within my role, peace out. Like,
yeah.
you can't pay me enough money, or at least you can, but for a very short period of time, I'm going to bank it and I'm going to go and start my own company, or go find another job down the road. And with, the challenge for finding talent and finding people who are good at what you need them to be good at, we've got to look at how we're treating those people within organizations so that we are giving them more than a big paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at that number, my parents made maybe a little more than that
Yeah.
combined.
Right.
Meanwhile
Absolutely.
meanwhile, I make more than that, and my kids have, like, whatever not whatever toys, but they're
Right.
always asking for, like, the next toy. My sister and I
Right.
had, like,
You're not waiting for
bare
Christmas.
bone
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
like, you can imagine what the generational difference is. They
Hmm.
were the first in my family to this country. I
Yep.
don't have to deal with that. I was the first to go to college, white
Right.
collar job. I've worked with them at their blue collar job when I was in college. But the
Hmm.
thing is, it's like and I'm that old man now, 'cause
Yeah.
when
Like,
my kid is
back in
like,
my
"I
day.
want" yeah, "I want this, daddy. I want this," and I'm looking, and they actually have we have, like, an extra room, so they have a playroom in the house.
Yeah.
I had my bedroom as a kid.
Right.
I'm like, "Let me talk to you. Can I see you over here? Over here?"
Exactly.
And
We
kid
need to
is
have a little
6 years old. I'm
conference.
like,
Yeah.
"You see all this stuff that's in this room? I wish I" so
It's
you
so
can,
different.
if you really look at your life, if you have similar experience to me, I mean, you
Hmm.
realize like, and my sister and I, yes, we wanted for things, but we had everything we want that we needed, and we got some things that we wanted. But Maslow's hierarchy, I bring that up so much because
Hmm.
I thought about that even with my mental health experience in the last year, where it's like
Hmm.
all the safety, the
Yeah.
esteem, like all that stuff is covered. So like my anxiety today is like this restlessness of what are those top tiers about?
Right.
That enlightenment, that would the stuff that's like not tangible.
Hmm.
So it's a little restlessness about that. So it's amazing that you bring that up because that's always in going through that experience myself, that's what I kind of related to is
Hmm.
just, okay, my basic needs are met. My safety, my security, I got friends, like my esteem, like, okay, now what else
Now
is
what?
there? Yeah. So it's
Right.
impatience more than anything, but it manifested itself in kind of like this restlessness, this anxiety.
Yeah. Now I see why you picked up the book about longing, because
Yeah. I mean,
because it
longing.
is looking at the twin sides of that whole
Yeah.
experience of that it's good and can also rob you, right? Like it's not
Yeah,
one thing or the other.
exactly,
Yeah.
and longing, that resonated with me because my wife's always like, "Why do you listen to this depressing music?" Right? And I wrote a eulogy for my friend when she was in college.
Mm.
She's like, "Can you write a eulogy for me?" I'm like,
Hmm.
"Why?"
Yeah,
She's like,
right.
"No, it's a class assignment." And one of the things I brought up is that she and I were always into like, yeah, it was like, I guess you could say depressing music. It
Yeah.
was just like deeper tones. It wasn't,
Yeah.
pop stuff. And I wrote in there that, Jesus, I was ahead of my time. I was ahead of Susan Cain in her book. But I said, listen, and people always said this about her because of the music that she listened to, but what that music is about, understanding, like wanting to know what drives that level of grief, of
Mhm.
sadness, of longing. And then
Mhm.
Susan Cain came out with this book. So I'm like, all right, now I got to read it because
Right.
I've
It
enjoyed her book.
parallels. Right.
Yeah. So
And yeah, and I think that resonates, when I think about Pain Rebel as well, of tying that back in, is that people have this fear of touching pain, of touching grief, of touching depression oftentimes. And so they
mm,
avoid it. They don't want to listen to the sad music. That toxic positivity has taken over in some angles where, no,
yes.
no, you just got to be
You
positive. It's
gotta be
just going to be
chipper, like,
great.
it's all like Britney
Yeah.
Spears and, like, Justin Timberlake. I'm like, but to me, that's not to me,
It's not
th
truthful.
it's not real.
Right.
Like, pain and struggle to me is more real, so if somebody can write a tone or
Yeah.
capture a melody where it's like, "God damn, that
Yeah.
hurts," I just wanna feel that sensation because it's built out of longing. It's built out of
Right.
something that is that fucking good
Right.
that you are broken without it. That
Yep.
sounds morbid, but it's just an appreciation for what's beautiful in life.
I think I think if we don't have those depths of pain and, negative experiences, I don't know that we have the same appreciation for the highs.
Yes.
When I look at a lot of the people I know who have been broken and battered by various experiences in life, they are the ones that are noticing the butterflies. They are the ones that are noticing the way that the breeze hits the trees,
Mhm.
right? They're the ones that are noticing what a gift every new day is, whereas people who have not necessarily tapped into that space don't have that same level of it, because they haven't acknowledged. They've had sorrow, I'm not saying that they have not,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
haven't embraced it for what it can actually bring them. And
Yes.
that to me is the basis behind Pain Rebel, is to not be sucked into the model of pain that we have been sold, that it's something to avoid or something to drown in, but it's something that is supposed to guide us and teach us and
Mm.
inspire us and heal us. Like, that is the purpose of pain. And when we use pain we hijack it and we use it in a way that it wasn't meant, that's when we end up with like long-term sorrow, long-term, just kind of malaise or detachment from the lives that we were meant to live.
Yeah, I mean, it's facing it head on instead of trying to suppress that feeling, and then
Correct.
any feeling that you suppress, it's gonna catch up with you. You're using energy to suppress it,
Yeah.
and then when it finally unleashes, like that rage we were talking about, it's been
Mm-hmm.
stewing in that pot for so long that it's just going to explode.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No time for that.
So Bridget, I'm curious,
Yeah.
what lessons have you taken from writing this book? I mean, I'm always curious if
Ah,
somebody leads into a book, they want to write the book, they have their
right.
ideas for the book, it evolves, the book comes out. What in that process changed in you, whether it was you looked at things differently,
Mm.
for better or worse? How did it change you putting this book out?
I think it may have been different with different books, but for this one, because each one of them was like a different aspect of me, I think this one was so tied in with my brain injury and so tied in with this idea of my own grief about having to leave behind a version of myself that I no longer could have. That this brain injury has forever changed me and how I live moment to moment, day to day,
Hmm.
that the process of writing it was also not anything like the process of writing any of the other manuscripts. So I think in and of itself, it was like a meta experience of Pain Rebel, right? It was like I was practicing what I was preaching by sitting in and living in the grief of that, and also feeling honored that I got to take that message across the finish line for other people to benefit from, and really acknowledging that compassion accountability piece, that I held compassion for myself of how freaking hard it was to put this together and to see it through to its completion, but also the accountability to get the thing done because I made a promise that I was going to do it, that it needed to be done. And I think just living in that was, I don't know if it was a lesson for me, but it certainly was an experience for me, and this acceptance that going forward, because many people have asked me, am I going to write more books? Because, I wrote the first 5 books in 3.5 years. So,
Wow.
that was, I was just cranking books out and these are, a couple 100-page books. They're not short books.
Mm.
And I was pumping them out because it just came so easy to me at some level. And Pain Rebel was not that experience. And going forward, I know that my process will have to change to accommodate for how my brain works now. And so it was that too. It was just learning in that experience. Oh, this book is not only different because of its content and like its meta process for me, but it's
Hmm.
also different because I can never again do a book like this. I can never again follow the process that I've always followed in the past to make that happen. It's gonna have to be different.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
have you gotten a taste for what that process would be?
Yeah, I think, before it used to be again very eclectic and very like drawing things from different places and putting them in this pile and then sorting it through as I went. Because of my short-term memory and processing issues, which is where the damage is most severe, and my bandwidth, because I feel sick all the time. I have tinnitus. I'm dizzy. So I can't power through things like I used to be able to. I can't do a marathon writing session and
Hmm.
organize and cut and paste and move things around. So in this way, instead of it being kind of, eclectic and, disorganized at first to get organized, it's going to have to start organized. It's going to have to start very methodically, very step by step from front to back,
Hmm.
and very, probably the way a lot of other people write books, right? Not the way
Almost
I've
like
ever written them.
sequential,
Correct.
like,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Like a step by step versus jumping around. I was very much, I had more of a squirrel, kind of, disposition. And now I'm going to be much more like a bear. I'm going
Yeah.
to kind of like go to the feeder, exhaust it, go to the next feeder, exhaust it, kind of thing. So it'll be different.
Have you thought about that example as a bear before?
No, it just came
It
up.
just popped up?
Yeah, I love bears. My daughter
Quite
loves
the example.
bears. Yeah, but
So
it's that same kind of, feeling. Yeah.
yeah. So you know more or less what you would wanna write about next? General
I have
ideas?
a few ideas in the hopper. One of them, so please no one take this book title from me, is unnesting, which is this idea. And, again, because I try to write from experience and write from observation, that, being an empty nester, even though my kids are, coming home at times and, not really gone. But that process of unnesting, we nest when we're about to have a baby, like you're going through with your
Mhm.
wife, right? And
Mm.
then we unnest when we're on the opposite end of that developmental trajectory. And so, what does unnesting look like? What does that mean for kind of knowing yourself differently, recreating a new life, a new identity that isn't anchored in the same way it was before you unnested, And I think, people of my age, my kind of, developmental trajectory it's a hard phase. It's a great phase and it's a hard phase. And trying to figure out how to navigate that, I think I have observed and listened to people, teach me and me teach them a lot of lessons that could be really helpful in navigating this transition so that they again can make the most of this short, sweet life.
Yeah, and I think between that topic itself and then your experience writing about your other various topics, your
Yeah.
coaching, your writing voice, I think people will find that very
Mm,
helpful.
thank you. Appreciate that. Well, thank you for being a cheerleader for me, John.
Absolutely. I love
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Thank
So
you. Me
before
as
we wrap
well.
up, is there
Yeah.
anything you want to share? Anything that's coming up? Anything you want to put out there? Anything at all?
Oh, that's a great question. So, one of the things that I never stopped to do, putting out 5 books in 3.5 years, I didn't really, by the time I finished one project, I was already halfway into the next one, running on to that one. I never slowed down to actually do a lot of things with any one of the books. So, one of the things that I've noticed in this new normal for me is that I have so much content out there that I have not leveraged in the ways that I could, that I need to go back instead of trying to run forward to the next
Mm.
kill. And so what I'm doing right now, I'm working with a couple, content developers and, people who are better technically than I am, and creating some online courses. So I'm creating what I call the revolution, which
I like
is
that.
yeah. So it's a revolution classroom that I'm going to be putting out there in, the various spaces to take online courses so that people can take the courses of the topics that are covered in Pain Rebel in a way that, they're self-delivering, they're hearing my voice, they're, watching the graphics, and they're getting a sense of what that means. And my hope is that, it builds their, kind of arsenal, their toolkit for being able to face what life brings them, and also gives them kind of an introduction to me so that if ever they want to bring that work beyond that and work with me as a coach or as a trainer or as a consultant, that they've gotten enough of a taste of me that they know what they're getting into, and we can have those conversations. So yeah, so that's coming up. That'll hopefully launch sometime, this late spring, early summer is my
Awesome.
hope. Yeah,
Yeah, it
thank
sounds
you.
amazing. As soon as
Thank
you
you.
share anything on social media about that, I'll share.
Oh, thanks, John.
Absolutely.
I
I
appreciate
love what
that.
you're doing. I love your work.
Thank
And just
you.
based on all the experiences that you've had to date and just sharing that with
Yeah.
people, I think that's huge. And I think, yeah, people hearing your voice behind,
Mm.
not just the book, but hearing your
Mhm.
voice, if you have video, sharing video, I think a lot of
Yeah.
people will benefit from that because it's not just how much they're going to read, but how
Right.
much they're going to listen to you and actually you're going to kind of bring it to their living rooms.
Exactly. And it's funny that, even I remember my cousin picked up my first book years ago, and she said, "Holy crap, it's like you're in my head," because I do. I write exactly how I
Yeah.
speak. So it's like, I don't,
Yeah.
I've had professional editors just walk away from the project. They're like, "I cannot edit this because it's just wrong. Like you're, incomplete sentences, like one word sentences." And I said, "I understand. You're going to have to edit it like you're editing a transcript of a conversation." because
Yes.
because
Yeah.
that's how I'm going to write to people, because I find that it's much more approachable
Mhm.
when they can just feel like we're sitting having coffee together and we're talking about the,
Yes.
the perils of life and love and, professions, and figure out how to tackle them all.
Yeah, it
So
doesn't have to
yeah.
have the perfect box with the perfect ribbon, like,
Right.
you're talking to somebody who loves chaos, so
Right.
I've learned to appreciate chaos a lot more in the last 25 months.
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, haven't we all? Or learn to, revile it, but either way, we sure
Yeah,
have learned how to live in
I
it.
think it depends on the day.
Absolutely.
Appreciation, revile it, appreciate it, revile it.
Yeah.
But, Bridget, thank you so much for
Oh,
sitting
thank you,
down for
John.
this conversation. This was fun. I look forward to reading the book. I think it's got a great message.
Thank you.
Um, something that's just so timely for the last 2 years of what everybody has gone through and just sharing from your experience with others. I think that's just an amazing story.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure. Really, I love what you've been doing out here, and what the book leads. You know, giving a voice to books and authors who can make this journey, more tenable and more enjoyable. So, thank you for that.
I am learning a lot from all of you.
Yeah.
It's just insane to think of how much I've picked up and learned. It wasn't even my intention. I've always been a curious person,
Hmm.
but just sitting in these conversations and all these different industries and backgrounds and seeing how it's all connected in some way or another, it's just
Hmm.
I'm just very lucky.
You got a good seat. You got a real
Yeah, I
good seat
do.
right there.
Absolutely. Front row
Yeah,
seat, and I love it. So thank you for talking about Pain Rebel, how we take our
absolutely.
power back. And I'll be sure to share information about your other books and your website and whatnot so people can look into the other books that you mentioned here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John.
And for anybody listening and watching, if there's anything that I might have missed due to limited time and my ability to go off on multiple tangents, asking different things, please let me know. Reach out to me or reach out to Bridget. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. All right. Take care. Bye.